All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, and I am the YubaSutter Poet Laureate here for Notes from the Field Poetry Hour. Thank you so much to the YubaSutter Arts Regional Council. Um, Make sure to check out their website for upcoming events, virtual and in a few in person at the New Sutter Theater. Today is my special honor to introduce my January 22 guest, my first guest of the new year, Ruben Quesada Phd. He is an editor, a poet, and is the editor of the forthcoming Latinx Poetics Anthology, The Art of Poetry, from University of New Mexico Press, and the author of Revelations, out from Sibling Rivalry Press. Next Extinct Mammal was his debut collection, and he's a translator of selected translations of Luis Cernuda, uh, out from Ariel Press in 2008. Dr. Quesada is a recipient of an individual artist's grant from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events for the City of Chicago. He hosts the Mercy Street Reading Series, serves as an editorial advisor for Jackleg Press. He teaches at the Attic Institute and the UCLA Writers Program. He serves on the board of Foglifter Press and the National Book Critics Circle. His writing has appeared in Best American Poetry, Guernica, American Poetry Review, Harvard Review, and many, many others. Uh, Dr. Quesada lives in Chicago, and I had the pleasure of meeting Ruben Quesada for the first time in 2015 at the Canto Mundo Latinx Poetry Retreat, when it was in Austin. And it was a treat to meet him there and to continue our friendship since then. Ruben Quesada, welcome. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, both about your forthcoming anthology and about your own work.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be able to share some of my work with your viewers and your community. I thought I'd start by reading some of my poems. This is more recent work. It's newer. It kind of is an extension of the work that I've been doing over the last few years, and there's a sample of it in my most recent chapbook collection of poetry titled Revelations. I've been really interested in the use of language, trying to push the boundaries not only of the sound, but also finding ways in which I can mine nature and different things in the world around me to really make sense of not just my place in the world, but my relationship to my past and my present, and of course my future. I'm going to start with a poem that's about my mother. And my mother, my fondest memory of my mother is when I was growing up, she had lots of plants. There were plants all over the house. We lived in an apartment, which meant that there really wasn't a space for a yard, much less a backyard. And so many of the plants that she had were in pots. And it wasn't until many years later, after we'd grown, her kids had grown, that she finally moved to a home that had a yard. And it was then that she was really able to really cultivate her talent and her passion for plants. And so this is really kind of about that memory. This is called My Mother is a Garden. In the backyard, my mother edges the lawn and plants strands of razzleberry fringe flowers. Next door, the chartreuse golden feather, farewell. Before I am born, my mother is acquired by the United States, coerced by some American zodiac dream She fled to Los Angeles, and decades later, she still withholds from speaking English, and only the fertile names of flowers have taken root. She is luminous, her hair a blackish gray against the philodendron, long and parted in the center. I lose her in the shade of an overgrown bougainvillea hanging onto the hillside behind the house. The horizon waves in lines of barberry and nettles, silver waves of wild deergrass. I have not spoken to my mother in years, but today I surprised her with a visit, and in the window's glow I watched her. I have taken the shape of her hips. Over the years, I've not only written about my family, but also about my religious upbringing. My mother is from Costa Rica and grew up Roman Catholic, and subsequently passed that practice on to her children. And although I'm no longer practicing, religion certainly played a strong influence on my understanding and relationship to the world. And this is a bit of this next poem is a bit of that exploration of religion and how maybe I lost some of it over the years. This is called After Losing Myself in the Middle of the Night. After losing myself in the middle of the night, an angel appeared and said, "Come with me." When my man left to join a Jesuit order in Ireland, I went and met a priest to confess. I found him on a website for bareback sex, drugs, shit, and piss. I have only ever left this planet once. As I slept in a billow of thistles at a stranger's place. Come and smell the stone roses. Taste the sweet coral honeysuckle sap of earth. Outside, salmon-colored clouds cleave to seaside olive trees. Above the doorsill, Christ begins to sag on the cross. A bending blue lavender light lapping like waves spins itself into the body of Adam. As if from silk, the translucent figure of Eve appears. Yokeless on some dimly lit coast, oxen settle at the edge of the sea only to be concerned with themselves. As you can tell, religion and family play a big role in my writing, but so does memory. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s during a tumultuous political time, very much like today. And as a child, Ronald Reagan was my president, or the president, I should say. I was too young to really know much then about his role in the world. But as I grew up, things became a bit clearer. And this is a mention of Reagan. I spent a lot of time reading about poetry from the 80s and 90s, and this implicates that period of time into this memory. This is called Trickle Down. This is how the dream begins. I stand on the lawn and watch my mother in a crowd. A girl in a black dress waits at the corner. She crosses the street. My eyes blur. Tires and birds dart into trees. Cars begin to lose their slack. It's Mary. I see her body flail into a crowd of children standing tightly tucked. Up close to my mother, Mary's face is pale, like the color of milk. Her dress is asphalt. Her eyes roll. I am 7. Our class attends her funeral. I wish it were a dream, and only after thousands had died, then, finally then, did President Reagan say AIDS. I am 10 when Rock Hudson dies. There is no funeral. He quietly turns to ash. I'll read maybe 1 or 2 more poems. And this next poem is one that's really close to my heart. When I was growing up, I wanted to be many different things when I grew up. And one of those things was a scientist. I had a strong interest in math and science growing up, and somewhere along the way, I lost my path and went and turned to poetry. This next poem is a bit about science. It's a bit about love and ways in which I examine a fraught relationship through that lens of science. This is called Decomposition. In this blood that haunts my skin, in the folds of my brain are burrowed the harrowed words to describe you. Bleak, cursed, and when the universe was young, it possessed the means to give you breath, to deliver you here for me. On this last day, you'd stumbled half alive onto the drawn curtains in the corner of your room. We watched ghostly orbs of light one last time drifting in like laughter. An ice cream truck's siren song shook you back to life from the hunger of heroin. Outside, children passed. Photographs browned like honey from years of smoke covered the walls. I watched you from your bed, where so many worlds undressed beneath the sap-like weight of phosphorus. Could the periodic table offer much more? Already you were sulfur, even gold. And I'll end with this final poem that's about the St. Louis Arch. It's a marvel, and St. Louis itself has a rich history, violent history, unfortunately, for its indigenous population, and this next poem is dedicated to one of those figures. This is called St. Louis for Pontiac, 1714 to 1769. Rising past the Mississippi, the gateway arch is a parabola, propelled out of the earth and whose cosine is a complementary angle to the sky. Sunsets are never the same here. Sunsets, long and profuse, pour onto arable plains. The wind ebbs. Sea grass prairies wave at the moon. A swish of tangerine. Leaves, beveled and stained glass abound. A skyline of winged bean, silver and green. River birch rises, heaped and nimbus, cumulonimbus. The river looms, the river flows. I see a dolphin, I see a face. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruben Quesada. Thank you so much for that beautiful reading of your work. From everything, from nations, family, memory, religion, queer identity, science, a lot to think about, and a very broad range of themes and subject matter. Thank you so much again for being our guest. So now I wanted to kind of segue over and talk maybe a little bit about this new anthology that you have coming out from University of New Mexico Press, Latinx Poetics: The Art of Poetry. And how did it come about? How did that anthology come about?
Many years ago when I was studying poetry as a student, both as an undergrad and as a graduate student, I feel like I've spent the majority of my life, at least half of my life, in a classroom. And something that I found missing, I think, was I found that there was a gap of writing, not just academic writing, but personal writing, prose, really, reflections on poetry from the perspective of people who have a connection to Latin America. And there are different anthologies and collections that are about aesthetics, poetics, the process of writing. There are many of those types of anthologies abound, but there aren't any anthologies that are solely written by people of Latin American heritage. And I mean to say anthologies of essays, collections of essays. There are anthologies of poems by people of Latin American heritage, but there aren't collections of essays. And so many years ago, I thought it would be great if there was a book that I could turn to that offered me insight, perspectives from people of Latin American heritage like myself, who love poetry and write poetry themselves. And I thought, well, why can't I do that? I can certainly put together an anthology like this. And so I took it upon myself to really put a call out and reach out to different poets and writers who had experience writing poetry, who would be interested in writing and reflecting upon their own experience reading poetry and writing poetry. And slowly, I found myself with a collection of essays that were from poets who had a connection to all regions of Latin America. So fortunately, I found interest at the University of New Mexico Press, and I'm really excited that it'll be out this fall.
That's wonderful, and it really is a testament to the fact that criticism, writing about not just publishing poetry, but publishing writing about poetry, and the practitioners is, I forget who said that. I think it was Tracy K. Smith, about like the determining factors of like canonization, and that is the commentary on that work, is the criticism, and you being part of the National Book Critics Circle, and just the kind of fierce advocacy that you do for Latinx poetics, poetry, is really, you know, something to be greatly admired. As somebody who has you know, been supported by you in many different ways, it's really also a testament to just the mentorship process in the Latinx community, you know, but other communities as well. Going back to the anthology, you know, what, you know, is there something that keeps coming back, or like something that you see, some patterns that you see in kind of the criticism and the, not the criticism of that, but the writing that you have in the anthology, maybe like some patterns that you might have you found interesting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, it's funny, you without there are so many books published during this is I'm just wrapping up my first year with the National Book Critics Circle, and what I learned during this first year is, as many people might imagine, there are a lot of books of poetry that are published within a calendar year. And there are so many different perspectives and different approaches and styles. And one of the things that I found really useful about reading through these collections of essays is that, like the collections of poetry that I encountered, there are so many different ways of writing. There are so many different styles. And the poets who have written about their own practice in this anthology really do address that. They come at poetry from an academic standpoint by placing their own work amid the work of other Latinx writers, or writers from Latin America, both who are writing in Spanish and as well as Portuguese. I also have essays that are written by Luso poets in this anthology. So, you know, my aim was really to try to find a way to incorporate many different perspectives of poets in the US who have a connection to Latin America, and not just the Spanish language, but also the Portuguese language, which is also part of the Latin American diaspora. And I think that often when, and these essays are written by poets who are early in their career, as well as poets who have been around for decades. The introduction to the, or the foreword to the essay is written by former US Poet Laureate Juan Felipe Herrera, and he really provides a really nice kind of insight and summary into the different essays and perspectives. He uses a word in his introduction that still resonates with me. He calls the poets in this collection warrior poets, or warriors. And I really love that, because it's really, it can be a real struggle, I think, for poets that aren't historically or traditionally part of the American literary canon to really find their foothold within the literary landscape. And so there has to be a little bit of fighting done. And so I really like that use of the term warriors, because a lot of these poets are really trying to not only share their work with the world, but trying to make sense of their place in it. And these essays really give us some insight on that. There's a great opening to one of the essays that's written by a poet named Tomás Q. Morin. And his essay is called The Horse and the Rider, which really just calls to mind an older collection of essays by a poet named Wallace Stevens, who has a collection called The Necessary Angel. And it's a collection of poetics, of essays about composition. But what Tomás Morin says in the opening of his essay is, he says, what could I possibly share about writing that could be of any interest to anyone, right? I mean, what do we as poets have to say about something that would be of interest to anyone? And I think that's really at the heart of a lot of these essays is, like me, I really wanted to learn and hear and read about the process from other poets, because this art is such a solitary art form. I think that there's this desire to want to connect with other people doing what you do. And these essays really provide some insight on that practice.
Yeah, that connection and building that community and those conversations, those cross conversations that maybe we're all having in private. As you know, as you say, writing is a very solitary act, but that doesn't mean that we're not in conversation with other people, either indirectly or directly. The people that we quote, the people that whose work inform us, and just how we grow from those conversations and from people who have impacted us. And so I'm thinking about, like, your growth, your personal growth as a poet, as a critic, as a scholar. Who has kind of been there for you, as a mentor, and or you don't have to name them, but what has that mentorship meant to you?
Yeah, it's it's been I think the toughest part about writing poetry is really just and maybe this is something I think that comes along with most art forms, is this idea or sense of wanting to belong, and wanting to make that connection with other people. And over time, and I've heard it put a different way. I think sometimes people say, you have to find your tribe. You have to find that group of people that really speak to you. And something that I've really been leaning into, and I've learned over the years, is that you really need to surround yourself with people who love you as a person and champion your work, and believe in you. And there are so many people who are far smarter than I am, and who've been doing this work for much longer than I have, who have been really open and generous with their time and with their advice, and have been very encouraging. Just sometimes it takes just having an ear, just having someone listen, or just having someone, give me a little pep talk occasionally when I get a string of rejections from different magazines, and say, that's happened to me. Don't worry about it. It's part of the process. And it's true. It's all part of the process. And sometimes I wasn't ready for some of that knowledge or some of that insight. And and maybe I was just too stubborn to really listen and accept it. And so I think that in due time and at everyone's pace, if you just keep at it, something that my mentors have taught me, and the people around me that I read and that I support have taught me, that determination and drive and just having a passion for the work you do, and doing it on your own terms, is really what matters. Is just be yourself and really lean into that when you're doing your writing. And because you're the only person that can say what it is you want to say. And I've always I'm starting to really believe and that there is a poem for every reader and a poet for every reader. And sometimes you find that person who your poems speak to, So you're lucky enough to find them while you're alive, and sometimes it happens after you. And so I think holding on to that and really allowing myself to really focus primarily on the work is something that I've learned from these essays and from the people that have been in my life, in my literary circles, and in my personal life as well. And as a critic, something that I'm learning as a critic is that criticism, book reviews, essays about poetry, they really should teach us not just about the process of an individual, but what's really useful about reviews or criticism is it teaches us how to read a poem. It teaches us how to talk about a poem. And I think that's really valuable about these essays and about writing reviews and criticism is it's not about, as some might say, tearing somebody down or tearing the work apart. What it's really about is learning how to read a particular poem by a particular individual, by looking at not only just a singular poem, but its relationship to other poems in a collection. And if it's a poet who's been writing books for a long time, it's how those poems that you're focusing on connect to a poet's entire body of work, because it's really a dialogue between the poet and the world. And so it's something that I've learned from these essays, and it's something that I've learned from the people around me.
That's a really great way to put it. A dialogue between the poet and the world. You know, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing here. You know, we're being present in the world. Ruben Quesada, Dr. Quesada, it has been such a pleasure to have you as a friend, as somebody who I admire. It's a huge honor. So I wish we were all in a crowded theater, you know, in the before times where we could hear everybody clap right now, but my claps will represent everybody in the audience right now. Thank you again so much. And I look forward to this new anthology, Latinx Poetics, The Art of Poetry, from University of New Mexico Press, coming out this fall in 2022. So keep an eye out for that. Do you have the cover art yet?
Not yet. Not yet. Soon enough.
Looking forward to that. All right. Thank you,
Ruben.
Ruben.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.